This message today has, it's like one of those books with multiple endings. I have multiple beginnings. Because there's so many things on our plate today. Thanksgiving for the years of this congregation, time of remembrance in our society, and the celebration of the gifts of what we do in serving God in this wider world. But I want to start with a story that Elaine reminded me of this morning. This is not mine. I wish it was, but I'd rather attribute it to the wonderful author who wrote it, which is a woman by the name of Anne Weems, who has over the years written some brilliantly wonderful bits of poetry and prose that has made us as a church stand up and take note of what it is and how we do things. It's appropriate today as this congregation celebrates 220 years of existence. It's a long time. It's almost as old as I feel sometimes. And younger than tomorrow. It's called Happy Birthday Church. It says there once was a church that only had party rooms. The sessions party room, the music party room, the feasting party room, the do justice party room, the love mercy party room, the touch lepers party room. At the center of the building was a large round room with an altar and a cross called God's party room. There was in the church an air of festivity and brightness that could not be denied, and the people outside the church pointed their fingers and shook their heads. Something should be done about that church. They were especially upset when they saw that the members wore party hats and smiles both inside and outside the church. Other congregations came to take a look and were shocked when they saw that this church was having so much fun, especially during a worship service, snapping their fingers and dancing. "Sacrilegious," screamed the crowd. But the people in the church just smiled at them and went right on doing things like taking people in wheelchairs to the park and playing ball with them. When everybody else was collecting canned goods for the poor, this church bought pizza and marched right into the dingy, dirty, paint-peeling apartments and sat down to eat with the tenants. They held picnics for the old folks' home, and old men ran races while the congregation stamped their feet in applause. It was at one of those picnics that some of the members climbed on the roof and shouted, "Good news!" "Now we can get them for disturbing the peace," said one of the outsiders. The police arrived with sirens ready for the arrest and came out 2 hours later wearing party hats and smiles. One Sunday afternoon, the entire congregation met at the jail and passed out flowers to the prisoners. The following week, after bread and wine and much laughter at the Lord's table, the people went to the hospital and asked to see the dying patients. They held their hands and mopped their brows and spoke to them of life. "Disgraceful," shouted the crowd. "They must be stopped." So the crowd appealed to the governing body of the denomination, and this committee of respected church people went to see them for themselves. "Do you deny the charges of heresy?" asked the committee. Do you deny that you have mocked the church and the Lord?" And the people of the church looked into the stern red hands and smiled at them. They held out their hands to the committee and led them to the birthday cake party room. And there on a table sat a large cake decorated beautifully in doves descending and red flames that read, and words that read, "Happy Birthday, Church." The people began cutting cake and blowing up balloons and handing out party hats to the committee members. Wait, cried the chairperson. "Can't you take anything seriously?" "Yes," said the people. "We take our commitment to the Lord very seriously indeed." "You don't take it seriously at all," interrupted the chairperson in a loud voice and red face. "You have parties and wear silly hats and blow up balloons and sing and dance and have fun. Do you call that commitment?" The people smiled at the chairperson and asked him if he'd like a glass of wine. The chairperson hit his fist on the table. "I don't want wine and I don't want birthday cake. We're here to reprimand you. We're here to show you that you're wrong. Can't you be serious?" "We are," said the people. "We're asking you to take communion with us." With birthday cake, screamed the chairperson. Outrageous. Outrageous? We ask you to sit at our table and sup with us. God gave the Holy Spirit to believers, and that is something to celebrate. It's an occasion for a party. We are celebrants of the gift of life. We are a community. We are God's church. Why are your faces red when we are trying to do justice and love mercy? Why do you shake your fists at us when we are trying to discover the hurting and begin the healing? We are overjoyed that we can be the church, a community of people who are many yet one, who are different, but who walk together and welcome any who would walk with us. When we weep, there is someone to weep with us and to affirm us, to take us to a party. When we see injustices, we must be about God's business of freeing the oppressed. When we are faithless, we have God's promise of forgiveness. Isn't it remarkable that we can be God's good news? Is it any wonder we have a church full of party rooms? There is so much love to celebrate. The committee stared at the people, and the people moved closer to them and put their arms around them. The committee chairperson stepped up to the table and sliced a piece of birthday cake, took a bite, and laughed out loud. He began slicing and passing it out. And when the wine was poured and the hands were held, the chairperson raised his glass and said, "There is so much love to celebrate." Happy birthday, church. Happy birthday. There is much love to celebrate. Sometimes we forget that. The scriptures today, we're talking about people who were waiting. The wise and foolish virgins, some who ran out of oil. I read those scriptures and I thought long and hard about what they meant, and I realized it really meant what it means to be a party church. Because there's two images that come out of the scriptures. One is how we use and share our resources. What have we done with our oil? And when we've run out of it, what have we expected with it? And whose do we take? And then, of course, there's the issue of waiting. What are you waiting for? You to say something else? We're always waiting for something. My neighbors, myself, sometimes are waiting to win the lotteries to make my life better. We're waiting for the economy to get better. We're waiting for the rest of the world to see it the way we see it. We're waiting for my life to begin. That's what we do. We all wait for our life to begin. We're all waiting for that day when I'm waiting for the day when I finish school so I can get a job and have a real life. Then I'm waiting for the day when I can get rid of the job and have a real life. And then I'm waiting for the time when my real life begins and I'm retired. And people spend their lives waiting. I need you to stop and think about a man who didn't wait. His name is Michael. Michael's buried in our cemetery. 230 years ago, Michael was a prisoner of war. He was a prisoner of war held in a fort in central eastern Ontario known as Fort Frontenac. A prisoner of the French. He escaped and he made his way to his home colony of, well, today it'd be Lower New York or Upper Massachusetts, in that area. And he tried to rebuild his life, but things changed and his colony went to war with the Crown. They had this thing called a Tea Party down there. And Michael and his family didn't feel they belonged anymore. He could wait for things to change, but he didn't. He took a party of his local settlers, his local people, and he moved back to the place where he'd been a prisoner of war. He came back to Fort Frontenac. Only then, this was known as Sand Hill in the village of Waterloo, on the edge of a place that had recently come into British hands and was called Kingstown. And Michael came here and with his friends and neighbors settled and started a community. And they put up a building, started to worship and give thanks. But they didn't wait for the conditions to change where they were. They moved on. They didn't come here and wait for somebody to build something for them. They built it themselves. They didn't wait for somebody to preach and teach. They started doing that amongst themselves. They didn't wait for life because they built life. They made life happen. And because they did, we're still here. And the city has grown. And the names have changed. And the irony is that the prisoner of the French is now the founder of a community with a French name, Cataract, well, French, Mohawk name, but Cataraqui. And this community grew by people who had stopped waiting and took the resources that they had and used them and made something of life. We're always waiting for somebody else to make our world different. I've been waiting all my life to hear that there'll be world peace. I've been waiting all my life to stop seeing my friends and neighbors and go off to war. I was waiting by the side of the road last Tuesday when the casket went by, coming off the airplane at CFB Trenton. I've been waiting 165 times, I think it is now, for war to end. It's not going to end until people get up and do things like make life. Make life. Make life work. Make life work no matter what your economy is, what your pain is, what your lost hope is, what your lost faith is. You make life happen. Because while we're waiting, God's doing things inside of us and reminding us that, yes, my son, yes, my daughter, you have a life. I've given you a life. I've given you the fullness of life. I've given you grace and love and forgiveness and hope. And when you lose sight of them, I'll hold on to them for you. I'll keep them for you. And I want you to celebrate what I'm doing for you. I want you to give thanks for what I'm doing to you. I don't want you to criticize yourself for how you have not measured up. I want you to see how you have measured up. How you have accepted life. Now live it. What we're celebrating here is giving thanks. It's a birthday. I don't remember ever having a birthday party for my children where it was, let's all sit around and be somber. You just gotta love a 4-year-old with chocolate cake smeared down his face, right? It's just the way things work. You know? 220 years is very young. It's very young. We really are sometimes as old as the hills and as young as tomorrow. And every tomorrow is a new opportunity to celebrate life and to give thanks. To give thanks for those who have served, who have built this community, who have bought and paid for our freedom with their own lives, who have bought and paid for our love and life by the way they've nurtured us, cooked, cleaned, and cared for us in this world. For the people who have touched us with God's love. So we're here today to give thanks. Thanks for the 220 years of congregation, for the missions that we do, for the people who have enabled this life at the cost of their own. There is much to celebrate. There is a whole lot to be thankful for. In my darker moments, I could sit at home and look at all the negative things in my life. I could look at all the things that broke, all the places where I snapped, all the places where I didn't follow the norm and wished I had because it would have been easier than going against the grain. And then I look back and think, no. If I focus on the down times, I'll never notice the up times. And God carries me through the down, so why would I be upset about it? You all heard the old thing, Footprints, right? You all heard that? Everybody knows what I'm talking about, that poem, Footprints? I don't need to quote it to you, do I? Do you know it was written just north of here, up behind Highway 38? Did you ever hear that story? There's some controversy to the authorship of it, but the story basically goes that a young lady was at the age of 17, 18 years of age at a camp up on Eagle Lake, a church camp. And she fell in love with one of the counselors. She was a counselor. She fell in love with one of the counselors. And she came from a very pious evangelical home in Toronto, here for the summers at this church camp. And she was madly in love with this young man, and she really wanted to think that she'd had a life with him. And then she discovered that he'd had a prison record. He'd had some trouble in his past, and that there wasn't any possible way he would be acceptable to her parents. And she went through a very down time, and she had this breakup fight with him as a teenager, and she penned that poem that night on the back of an envelope, and then gave it to a friend. She didn't even hung on to it. She gave it to a friend of hers. And the friend hung on to it, and the friend liked it and used it. Now, the young lady did go home, did talk to her parents about the young man. The young man started to court her, and then decided he was going to go into the ministry, and went into the ministry of one of the evangelical churches. They got married. They had a daughter. 22 years later, they were living on the west coast of the U.S., Washington State. He was the senior pastor in a large city church. He was at the point of retirement. And their daughter was a youth minister and took her youth group on a camping trip. He had suffered a couple of heart attacks over the previous years, and so, but they went to help the daughter with the camping trip, and on a hiking trail, the daughter fell off the trail and plummeted some distance and was badly injured. And in seeing his daughter go over the edge, he had a heart attack. And that night, in a Seattle hospital, I believe it was Seattle, this woman was sitting with her husband near death and her daughter badly broken. In the dark, a nurse came in and said to her, "When I face bad things, I read this poem." And read to her the poem she had written years before at a lake outside of Kingston, Ontario. The book it has since been republished and published. And if you look at actually older editions of the poem, it'll always say author anonymous. If you look at the newer editions of books that include it, it says Margaret Fishback Powers, which is her name. And she was given, and she could prove, she was able to track down the original copy from her friend and prove that she had actually written the poem 30 or 40 years previous. You never know where life's going to take you. You never know what journey you'll be on. You'll never know what you have to be thankful for or not thankful for. But whatever it is about, this is a life that's worth celebrating. And the God that carries us through every dark and troubling moment. Whether you're traveling on an airplane to Honduras or Guatemala, whether you're facing your engagement with your battalion, or whether you're serving at a turkey dinner or going down to the hospital to visit somebody who's sick. Whatever it is you do in faith and in life, the history that we have to share is a history of forgiveness, of love, and of hope. God is here. Let's celebrate. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.